Joining me now is Matt Tardio. He's been with us before. We're glad to have him back. Here's his X account if you'd like to follow him. There it is, @AngerTab, @AngerTab. Matt, welcome back to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Remind our audience of your background.
Yeah, I retired medically out of the United States military. Started off in the infantry, then was a Green Beret, then went into law enforcement shortly after that, and then did some security consulting before I ended up getting into this world of podcasting.
Excellent. Speaking of law enforcement, we've been covering it now for about a year or more. Illinois allowing illegal aliens to have a badge and a gun and be cops.
Yeah.
And apparently that is now actually in effect. I reported on our Worldview report last week. That's actually taking place. Can you imagine going through the state of Illinois, getting pulled over by an illegal alien with a gun and a badge?
Yeah, no. And it's one of the questions that you end up getting asked when you go to purchase a firearm, whether or not you're inside of the United States or you're a U.S. citizen. So if you're an illegal alien carrying a gun and a badge, I have other questions. I mean, because clearly they already violated federal law by obtaining and purchasing that firearm, unless they're on loan from the police department, and then you're going to start going into some gray area. But it's still messed up.
No. I mean, this is how you destroy a republic, is it not?
No, it is. And, I saw that they had, it's bad enough what we've got going on over inside of Dearborn, Michigan. You've got the Islamic writing on the police patches. And I don't know if you saw what went on down there, but the police are clearly ignoring what's taking place inside of Dearborn, just like they're ignoring what's taking place inside of Portland. But, there's, a bunch of this stuff that's taking place all over the country. You've got inside of New York City, not just, a Muslim police force, but also a Jewish one that's over there as well. And then, here we got Somalis that are just jumping up and stating that they're there to serve the population. One of the biggest issues I have is they look at it and they say, well, look, we better understand this community and where they come from. But what they don't understand is that just because you come from Somalia and most people in Somalia are Muslim, when you get to America, that doesn't mean you can take your wife and lock her inside of a house, take her credit cards, deny her phone privileges, and beat the crap out of her because you don't like what she's doing because you're teaching her, right? Like those things are all legal here in the United States of America. You just can't do that stuff. And if we have a police department that is catering to that, how do you want to say, societal norm that ends up coming over from Somalia, then we have Americans that are being suppressed. Their rights are being stripped away from them, all because they have a cultural understanding of where they came from. No, if you came to America, you're now an American, you leave that stuff behind, and that needs to be changed.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does. Let's go to X real quick. We're going to talk about Venezuela, X, Seditious Six, Muslim Brotherhood. Let's talk about X. We reported on the Worldview report tonight about all of these, even some so-called pro-MAGA sites that have been found out that they're actually from overseas. So you basically have the Hegelian dialectic going on again, thesis and antithesis, idea, opposite idea, get on social media, stir things up. Some are for MAGA, some are against MAGA, just a lot of noise and infighting. We find out that a lot of these accounts are being run from overseas, a psych op to create division in America. Speak to this, please.
Oh, yeah, sure. Where do you want me to begin? You want me to begin in Turkey or Eastern Europe that's not part of the EU? Or do you want me to go to the accounts coming out of Syria, right? There's a massive MAGA account called MAGA Nation that was coming out of Eastern Europe that's not affiliated with the EU. They have almost 400,000 followers. And they put out probably some of the most divisive, and I don't even think anybody in the United States knows what MAGA means anymore. There's people that are saying Donald Trump isn't inside MAGA, and they're kicking people out left and right. And it's all coming from these different accounts that are pushing often, misleading or misinformation over online, and it is doing nothing but benefiting the enemies of the United States of America by dividing us. At the same time, we have guys like the Butcher that just got tried over in a New York City federal court. He ended up actually pushing a child along to go and commit a school shooting back on January 22nd. He ended up getting tried guilty of that, along with trying to recruit people for a ricin attack and an IED attack over inside of New York. That's a problem. Another account that I was tracking for a while and listening to goes by the name of The General. Guy has over 100,000 followers. That account comes out to be based out of Turkey. I've slid into his spaces and listened to him a couple times, and it is some of the most racist things that I've ever heard. And so what we have is we have accounts from all around the world that are pushing decisive narratives over inside of the United States. And what's probably the most troubling part about it is you end up finding those people that might be pushing on that radical side hanging out in those spaces or those comment sections, and they're taking taking them from those comment sections and then they're moving them over to Telegram channels and other places where they radicalize them at an extremely rapid rate, and then have them go out and commit violent acts over here in the United States of America. And probably my biggest fear for it is that they're looking at pushing a civil war. Why else would we have countries pushing both sides of the different party lines? Why do we have countries pushing the extreme far left and the extreme far right, and at the same time we have violent acts that are occurring over inside of this country? And I think it's pretty obvious to me that our enemies know they can't invade the United States, and they want to do nothing but cause a civil war, or at least a lot of freaking turmoil.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so let's talk about Muslim Brotherhood. The executive order by President Trump, we read it. It seems pretty weak. It seems like maybe he's just throwing a bone to the MAGA crowd, those of us who are up on Muslim Brotherhood and been talking about it for decades, because it doesn't seem to be going after all of Muslim Brotherhood or CARE, but certain divisions. I don't know if they're going to pick one or two to pick on, maybe even ones that are basically nothing burgers. But I think Muslim Brotherhood altogether and CARE altogether needs to be dealt with, and these people need to be, booted out of the country. This is, we all know it was Muslim Brotherhood comes, as you know, out of Egypt, 1928, Albania. Then in 1987, they start Hamas. And then in 1994, they start Council on American Islamic Relations. They have a gazillion other organizations on college campuses and whatnot. I mean, this is a rat's nest in a wood pile. And it's going to take 30 days for this and 45 days for that. And at the end of the day, I'm afraid nothing's going to be done, because the Donald Trump that was so hard on Islam, rightfully so, in 2015, and then came into the presidency, he's not saying the same things he did then about these mosques and what they're doing. He's now got his family tied up with them in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and now Qatar is, going to get a training facility in Idaho. I just don't see this as being a serious initiative, and they're going to have to go to great lengths to show me that it is. I'm not buying it based on what I'm reading. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are hopefully Marco Rubio does his job and makes sure that people dig into all of the different chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood and are able to dig into it. I'd be really interested to see what ends up happening once the Muslim Brotherhood, certain chapters end up being declared a foreign terror organization, because that opens up our government to be able to do a lot of different research going into it. Also makes me wonder if guys like Mamdani may have possibly had some money being funneled into his campaign, pushing him in order to get into office. He's one of those guys that didn't want to ever speak bad about the Palestinian state, speak bad about Hamas, speak bad about October 7th or anything like that ended up occurring. My main concern is people like him, Ilhan Omar, and everybody else. How much money is actually being funneled into them, actually coming from the Muslim Brotherhood through various different organizations? And labeling even just a couple chapters of it will be a huge help. And obviously, I'm on your side on this. I think that we should just go ahead and just carte blanche across the board. The entire organization of the Muslim Brotherhood needs to be labeled a foreign terror organization. It's a huge issue.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the Venezuela. It looks like we've got about 30% of our, let me actually read I have a report on this. 30% of the U.S. Navy's deployed warships are currently in the Caribbean. Now, if that report is accurate, then that tells us something's about to happen. And we're also hearing that they may be there through, a lengthy period of time. I'm reading more reports on that today. So I don't know what's about to happen. I don't think it's anything in the next 24 hours from what we're reading, but something is coming in Venezuela. And I don't think it's about drugs totally at all. I think it's about China, Russia, Hezbollah, Iran. I think it's that island of that Margarita Island where they've been training terrorists. The Iran has for a long time. I think they're basically running these little ships and smuggling some of these terrorists into the U.S. I don't know why President Trump doesn't come out and tell us this really isn't about drugs, folks. I think it's about smuggling in more terrorists than I think it is about drugs. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts is I think it's about a regime change, and you're absolutely spot on when it comes down to Russia, China, Iran, all of that influence going on over there. We don't need those countries over in our hemisphere. They need to go back to where they came from and get back to the other side of the globe. Even more so, we can dig in and we can say, yes, we do have an issue with drugs that are coming out of Venezuela. It's kind of like a little hub that's going back and forth. my main concern looking at Venezuela and why the United States ended up going down there and blasting every single boat that's on its way out of there carrying drugs. It's one of the main countries that drugs flows, one of the top 5 countries that drugs flow into Venezuela, out of Venezuela, and into the United States, ends up coming out of India. A couple of weeks ago, India ended up having a terror attack that ended up getting foiled by their police services, and they ended up having enough ricin to kill almost 250,000 people. Ricin mash, if they would have refined it and actually employed it correctly, they could have killed almost 250,000 people. Ricin is very powerful, very potent, really small. You think about like the fentanyl, if you will, when it comes down to plotting a terror attack on somebody that you want to just go out and kill a ton of people. So it's very small, it's very powerful. So they'd be able to fit that and smuggle it over into Venezuela and then move it up into the United States and conduct a plot here. And like I said, there was the guy that just got pleaded guilty in the federal court to trying to conduct a ricin attack here inside the United States of America. I also think we have issues with China, right? China's got a huge freaking well-beaten path going from Venezuela and up through Mexico into the United States of America. Chinese citizens are, stealing our technology, stealing our intel secrets at an astronomical rate over here inside of the U.S. and sending it back home. So it's an issue. As far as whether or not war is going to come, I mean, there was 2 B-52s that I was tracking off the coast of Venezuela the other day. They issued a notice to air traffic missions right off the coast of Venezuela, letting commercial aircraft know if you fly through this area, even if you're at cruising altitude, it might not be safe for you. So there is a possibility that things start flying back and forth. I look back to Trump in 2019. He was very hard on Maduro back then, and he wanted a regime change back then. And so I don't think it's out of the question that that's what he's looking for today, and he's doing it for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, and I also think there's $17 trillion in assets in the ground over there that could also help. That could also help offset our $37 trillion debt, not counting our off-record debt. So I think it's about tokenization and assets and minerals. That's the new game as we get to this end of this debt-based system and go to asset-based system that has to be tokenized. So I think that's that's playing, because wasn't it Smedley Butler that said all war is for corporations? So yeah. I think that has to be added in.
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting question to look at as well. The first country to enter Afghanistan and declare the Taliban a legitimate government was China, right? I can point to reports, and I could actually point to personal testimony when I ended up tasking soldiers out over inside of Afghanistan up in the north to go and actually guard Chinese mining companies and stuff up inside of northern Afghanistan. And so now, Trump's looking at getting Bagram Airfield back. He wants that sucker back, and rightfully so. We can project ourselves across the entire region from there. It was stupid for us to give it up in the first place. We should have held on to that. And truthfully, we should have left a contingency force behind in order to keep that region safe. The attacks and stuff like that are going on over inside of India that I talked about with the ricin. A lot of that's coming out of Pakistan, and a lot of that's coming out of Afghanistan. So all of these are major issues that if they were handled correctly in the past, which hindsight's always going to be 2020, but if they were, correctly handled in the past, that we wouldn't be sitting on these issues today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on those that are talking about Al-Qaeda hitting us here in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a very real threat. It's an absolute very real threat. Got personal knowledge myself that there has been plenty of plots taking part coming over here into the United States. And I think they are just kind of waiting for the right time. I think it's going to look vastly different than what people think. 9/11 hijacking an airplane. No. Explosive vests along with active shooter situations, multiple cells of active shooters going through different cities in the United States of America. So they overwhelm our law enforcement force. I think that's a very real possibility.
Then we're on the same page because since 2008, we've been talking about, you can go back into our vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, type into the search engine, the perfect day, and you'll see we started talking about terrorists, Islamic terrorists hitting our schools, multiple schools in one day. That was 2008. Then when October, and we did it many times with different guests who are, one of them who's an expert who wrote the big book on the Beslan terror attack that is kind of used as the blueprint, where they end up killing between teachers and students 300 plus. Then you add in October 7th, and we know that I think that kind of attack's coming here. And we've talked about the fact that you have now finally the DNI coming out, 2 months ago and saying, hey, police, be aware, first responders, be aware. the concern is they're using uniforms, looking like first responders. Then we find these, what are they, SIM cards and card servers that could disrupt in New York, but then put out millions of texts, call in all kinds of fake phone calls, swatting, if you will. You get your first responders and police and sheriffs on one side of town, and they do a terrorist attack on the other side of town. And then they all run over to the other side of town. People from the next county over run in to back them up, and then a terrorist attack happens in that county. And then, the next county over, those folks run in to back up that county because they're people over in the first county. And this continues in a coordinated attack, overwhelming the first responders, and not to mention the first responders become the victims too. But the public is confused to death because first responders, some of them turn out to be terrorists in first responders' uniforms. I just don't think in many regards our police departments, and I talk to local police, okay? Many of them don't know diddly squat about Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, CARE. They don't know who the imam is at the local mosque. They don't know that he's bringing in Siraj Wahhaj, an unindicted co-conspirator in the bombing of the World Trade Center. You're like, this is who is your imam. Have you done any research on the imam at your mosque? No, what's his name? And then you tell them, and you're like, he's banned from going into parts of Europe because this is who he is and what he does and who he associates with and does fundraising banquets for. And he's brought Siraj Wahhaj to the mosque. Well, who is that? The unindicted co-conspirator in the bombing of the World Trade Center at the mosque down the road, speaking. They don't know any of this.
Weird.
So you're telling me the average police department and sheriff's department is ready for what these guys have planned? And I think the answer, aside from a few that maybe have a police chief or sheriff who comes with a background like yours and becomes the police chief or becomes the sheriff, aside from the few communities like that, most of them are not ready for what's about to happen, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, our borders are not secure. I'd encourage anybody that's very curious to look at this. I know, the current Trump administration is saying that we have the most secure borders in history. That's not saying much for the southern border in the United States. I would push people over to go check out the GOAT initiative and check them out. They're over inside of Southern California. They've come across lots of things, passports from Pakistan, cell phones. I mean, just stuff that would make your stomach puke, knowing what's pouring over into the United States of America. I honestly don't even think that they need to infiltrate the police departments. I don't even think they need to infiltrate the fire departments or anything because, we've reached a point in this country over the last decade to where we have stopped funding flowing into law enforcement and our first responder community. So they're greatly undertrained. When you talk about law enforcement responding to active shooters, you're talking about them, dealing with one, maybe two guys max. That are out there doing these things. And so they're going to come in heavy handed and attempt to do their best work that they can. I want you to take that and go to a 5-man cell that's armed with, semi-automatic rifles that is capable of shooting and maneuvering. And that is going to cause a massive problem, all right? A huge problem just in one area. Put 2 of those cells out on the street in very close proximity to each other where you're dividing these agencies up and it's going to cause a huge issue. So
and I'm not implying that I'm not implying that police departments have been infiltrated, but I do think the concern is them getting uniforms, right? Buying uniforms, obtaining uniforms, and then confusing the living daylights out of people because they now, are able to penetrate into areas of chaos, right? And then you add in drones. I mean, how concerned are you with drones in these terrorist attacks? Much less, we've been showing video footage for a few years of what looked like the IRGC mocking up out in the deserts, sending drones over. And they were actually, one of the videos we showed, the drone was then shooting a machine gun and killing and shooting a bunch of cardboard cutouts on the ground. And so the IRGC was threatening this. It looked like maybe it could come over from the deserts of the Southwest. How concerned are you about that? And the cartels working with the terrorists? Because we've shown a map that appears to show that the IRGC and Venezuela working together have purchased a lot of properties from California all the way through Texas and then down in Florida. So if they are using shell companies to buy properties and housing in terrorists in these, how concerned are you about the cartels working and planning a major attack coming over the border, including drones?
Well, I'm extremely concerned about the cartels in a completely different capacity than I am, when we're talking about Al Qaeda. I think there's a reason the U.S. has been holding off a little bit on going after the cartel inside Mexico. I think it was last week Trump had alluded to he'd be okay with dropping bombs down inside Mexico to take them out. And you look at what the Mexican president had came out and said that it's unconstitutional for them to be going out and killing cartel members because she's essentially sentencing them to death. God forbid you go after them, right? So she's not okay with that, what's going down there. We had another politician get knocked off the other day down inside Mexico. I think it was yesterday. So my concern is that we have all of these cartel members here inside of the United States of America, places, all these border cities and regions that are absolutely, undoubtedly, have infiltrated some of those local municipalities, police departments, et cetera. You've got cases over in California of people that work for DHS, people that work inside prisons that have been bought off and paid for by the cartels. But when they start getting targeted down inside Mexico and they start getting orders to start killing here inside of the United States of America, seeing your local law enforcement officers getting shot parked in their patrol cars on the side of the road, seeing your mayors and officials getting shot is going to become a very real fear. As far as the drones go, with Al Qaeda and the terrorists, the first time I ever saw a drone used in warfare like that, like a first person view, personal drone that you can get off the internet, like a quadcopter drone. The first time that I ever saw one of those get used was actually by the Taliban over inside of Afghanistan. They flew it up and over the base and actually successfully detonated an explosive device on the base. Now they're widely used. You talked about Iran having the one with a machine gun on it. Well, Ukraine's got them to the point now where they have grenade launchers, launched like set and actually killing Russians with it. So drone warfare is kind of the new step and the new way forward, and it's a new threat that we have to deal with. Luckily, electronic warfare has been going on for a while, so we're able to start, controlling some of those things. So as far as them going across the border, not too concerned about it in those different particular regions, but it is a very real possibility for a new system of delivery here inside of the United States.
Inside the U.S. And of course, here's a map we've shown before, some of the Mexican transnational criminal organizations spread throughout the country. So they've been here. They're actively working, Sinaloa Network, and so many we could name. Let me go lastly to the Seditious Six. Is that what they're being called now, Matt?
I believe that's what they're calling them.
Tell me your thoughts on this. As a former military guy, what are your thoughts on this?
So, I mean, I'll step outside from being a former military guy and just say, I'd ask you the question. What was your first thought when you saw that video? What did it bring to mind? What did you think first in your mind?
First of all, why were you not doing this during the Biden administration? Why are you doing it now? Why were you not concerned of the politicalization of our military during the Biden administration? But my first thought was, well, what are you talking about? What examples do you have? They didn't give any examples. What unlawful orders are you talking about? That was, to me, I didn't have any context for why they were saying what they were.
Right. So did you see that in a way of them saying, if Trump gives an illegal order, was that something that went through your mind, or was it just
absolutely.
one of those, why are you doing this? Okay.
It was they either think he has given illegal orders or they think he's going to give illegal orders, and they're concerned that now we're going to have nervous troops shooting Americans on the streets. I'm like,
so
why?
That is why I bring that up, right? Because if you, as the average human being, if you look at that situation and as a reasonable human being, and you hear what they said and you listen to what they said and you go, clearly they are telling the military not to obey unlawful orders from the president of the United States, or what they perceive as unlawful orders or illegal orders from the president of the United States. That to me is very, very telling. As somebody from, with a military background, obviously, retired after 16 years out of the military, I can tell you that that is not something that anybody ever needs reminded of. You go find the last time a senator, congressman, any statesman actually came out and had to remind the military that they don't have to follow illegal orders. It doesn't exist, because everybody is well aware. Now, that in context goes against the grain with a lot of things, with how they ended up presenting it. And I say that because this was not designed for them to have the average soldier stand by and question and say, every order I get a question, if I don't think it's legal, then I don't have to follow it. That's not how that works. As a matter of fact, what the UCMJ actually says is the orders that are passed down to you are presumed to be legal. as they come down. If you really think about that, you're presuming these things to be legal only when it's overtly obvious. You're ordered to just start murdering people, right? You tie somebody's hands behind their back and your captain comes up and tells you to shoot that individual in the back of the head. That's an illegal order, right? That it's very clear that is the order that you don't get to follow. These guys knew exactly what they were doing. These guys and gal knew exactly what they were doing. There was no need for them to do that. Especially, Senator Kelly, the guy retired as a captain out of the Navy. He's got years of experience. He knows exactly what he was doing. And there's a reason why they sit there, and they knew that they were going to cause a panic. They knew that they were going to cause an uproar, and they want to try and hide behind the fact that, they didn't state that the president has given an illegal order. They didn't state anything other than what the law says. Well, it's not what they said. It's what they also didn't say. They also didn't say that they are supposed to presume all of the orders being passed down to them are legal unless it's overly obvious. You don't want your basic infantry private questioning orders coming from their captain. Or from their platoon leader, or from their staff sergeant, their squad leader, their team leader. You don't need them doing that because they feel like it's illegal. It doesn't work that way. All right. The military is a machine. So that was put in place for a very specific reason. And it was not for you to sit and question the deployment of troops or, an entire military campaign.
And I think we've had our longtime buddy, Trevor Loudon on here talking about the connection between Senator Mark Kelly and China. So I don't know if you've done any research on that, the connection between Senator Mark Kelly and China. Trevor Loudon's talked about it quite a bit.
I haven't.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Logan, why don't we pull up some of the old shows on that? Can we show them on the screen real quick? Can you pull them up in our archive and show the audience real quick? Mark Kelly and China, see what comes up in our database. But we should send those over to Matt to look at. Because
I'd love to see
It's been a good couple years. It's been a good couple years. That we did.
This isn't the guy that was living in China, is it?
Well, I don't know if he lived there, but he had a lot. I think he actually did go over there for a while. In fact, Trevor wrote about it, I think, in his book, White House, Security Risk Senators. Yeah. His whole book, which I think is in my library right there, Security Risk Senators. And he went into what he documented as an in-depth relationship between Mark Kelly and China. Do you have anything you can show us? Just shows our archive where we were talking about that, Logan? He's looking in our archive. Our new system will be up soon. That'll make it much, much faster. But yeah, so one has to wonder, as he went into that book, Trevor Loudon, Security Risk Senators and their connections to these different groups, Democrats, Socialists of America, China, and all these, how much of this, again, is being orchestrated by our enemies to create division in the country, to create chaos, to create a lack of trust in our leaders. I remember some of the former KGB officers who came to America and started trying to warn the FBI about the tactics of Russia. And sadly, our FBI didn't want to take them seriously. So a lot of these guys started writing books and speaking publicly. And one of the things they warned about was before the former Soviet Union, now Russia, moves, or any of these other communist countries, they're going to try to sow into the minds and hearts of the American people a distrust of their leaders. They are also going to try to cause them to lose any moral authority, releasing videos, pictures. If they can release anything of them involved in compromising positions, pictures of them engaged in immorality or cheating on their spouse or whatever they're doing with someone else.
No, it's so much deeper. It's so much deeper. You're referring to the naked communist, right?
Yeah.
And so if you go back and you look at the naked communist, these are rules that the KGB agents were given back in the 50s and 60s when they ended up coming to the United States of America. Things like taking over our education system, working their way into the government, working their way into, radio, working their way into the news, taking control of that, pushing the party line, doing away with religion, doing away with religion inside of schools on the basis of separating church and state, right? All of those things, if you go through and you read it, are actually coming through. And I think there's like 48 points or 48 rules or basically standing marching orders that they were given. And a lot of it still rings true to this day. And so when you look at what's taking place in the world, you look at now Russia has decided to go over and invade Ukraine. Now we've got issues with China going over and moving on Taiwan. Now we've got all of these problems in the Middle East. you go back to the KGB's old playbook and start taking a look. There's something from the 70s called Operation SIG, SIG. You go look into that. That is an operation, a complete psychological operation that was launched by Russia to basically turn the United States against the nation of Israel and cause turmoil over inside of the Middle East. And what did we see over there? Well, we saw Russian Spetsnaz working side by side with Hezbollah. We saw Russian weapons stacked in southern Lebanon. I mean, all of these things were taking place. So it's no secret to me when I end up taking a look at these things and say, yes, we absolutely have that happen. And I'd echo it all the way back to the beginning of our conversation when we say that you have a mass misinformation and disinformation campaign going on the internet where we have a bunch of it going out and it's corrupting the minds of our youth, right? Think about this for one sec. The most popular social media platform allegedly in the United States is X and or Twitter. But our youth, the most popular one for our youth is TikTok. And I want you to think about the amount of fraudulent accounts that were over on X that were purportedly supposed to be Americans, U.S. citizens, and the type of content that they were putting out, which we know is extremely corrupt for our country. It's going to just erode it. And I want you to think about the information that they're pumping into the minds of our youth. They went from infiltrating into our universities and pushing the party line in our universities to now pushing it over on TikTok and those different platforms. Every single pro-Palestinian rally I've been to, there's always an American communist movement or socialist movement that's over there pushing their flyers, pushing everything else. And it's not a coincidence that they're all in the same exact place. All of this stuff, in my opinion, is being orchestrated as an information op in order to start degrading the United States. When you ask about senators like Kelly or anybody else for that matter, and I haven't dug into Kelly's background, now I have to really dig into his background in China. But when you start looking at that's part of where it comes from. It's indoctrination through education. It's indoctrination through social media. It's going out and doing cold bumps, shaking people's hands and infiltrating in the right places. All of those things are now combined, and it's being put in overdrive with this social media campaign that they've been launching.
And so how much of it do you think, in closing, is about preparing for a civil war in America? If we're going to go to World War III, let's disrupt America with a civil war. Those will be so consumed at the local and state level, they're going to have a hard time fighting a war. So let's get them involved in that chaos. And we see things going on in North Carolina you can speak to, and all the other things happening that seem as though there's a concerted effort from propaganda on social media to the comments by the Seditious Six, as they're being called, and others. It seems, and even some of the movies being put out there, the articles written, the things said by elected officials that seem to be trying to incite a civil war in America. True or false?
That's true. And I think they are trying to incite a civil war in America. But I think their overall plan in order to take over America or in order to take over that world lead, right? Reason America is in such a good place is because the world reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar, so on and so forth, right? All of these things and all of this flourishing economy that the United States has ends up being because we ended up taking over as the world superpower. That's what happened. Russia ended up collapsing. The Soviet Union ended up collapsing because they, ran out of freaking money at the end of the day. Well, look at the United States. We're at $38 trillion in debt, right? And pushing to be north of 39 trillion. And if you look at how much spending has been going on over the years, it's a big problem. Trump's tariffs, he was leveraging those against other countries. And what we've been getting in return is mineral rights deals. For the first time in modern history, we saw a backwardation going on with the price of silver, to where silver futures prices were actually behind the silver spot price. And the whole market ended up, being on lockdown. It reached an all-time high, a peak high. You're looking at China buying massive amounts of it. Russia is buying massive amounts of gold and silver in an attempt to create a BRICS currency and put that down. And so, in my opinion, I think Russia and China know that they can't take on the United States in a near peer conflict along with NATO because they'd get spanked. And so instead, what they're doing is looking at causing all of this destabilization here in the United States. And by pushing that party line, by pushing that doctrine, I mean, look at what it's doing to us. How many people on SNAP and EBT, were illegal aliens? How many government programs and benefits over in Chicago? You've got what I think it was $16,000 in EBT plus I think it was 6 months free rent, things like that that the city was giving to Venezuelans that were moving over there, illegal aliens. So how much longer do you think the United States can take doing that before we all go bankrupt? Right, it's not going to take very long, and when that happens, when we get that hyperinflation, when the dollar starts crashing, we're in trouble. Saudi Arabia hasn't agreed or disagreed to be a member of BRICS. They were invited a little while ago. Saudi trades a ton of oil. Now, imagine if Saudi Arabia ends up signing up with BRICS, and BRICS says, you know what, from now on, from this point forward, if you're going to do business and sell oil with or buy oil from a BRICS nation, you're going to do it in a BRICS currency. Egypt, BRICS nation, controls the Suez Canal, right? Imagine what happens when all of these things end up going through. And the United States still gives money to Egypt all of the time. And, Muslim Brotherhood based out of Egypt. Egypt even considers the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. The United States needs to get its act together, or we're going to be in a hard place really, really fast.
Indeed. Look at this in closing. Fox News. I looked some of this up real quick. Fox News even reported back in 2024, former astronaut Senator Mark Kelly started spy balloon company funded by China. Okay.
Big surprise there, huh?
Then I went to an article at trevorloudon.com on him. Mark Kelly, now an Arizona senator, Democrat senator, he took part, invited to an all-expense paid retreat at a countryside resort in 2003. He left China 5 days later, not only with a future spouse, former Representative Gabby Giffords, but also with a lucrative regime business contacts. Kelly attended the annual Young Leaders Forum, a 5-day junket co-hosted by the Chinese People's Institute of Foreign Affairs, which is under the leadership of the Communist Party of China. The conference allowed Kelly an opportunity to mingle with high-profile Communist Party officials, raising stars in Chinese society. Attendees included, and goes on to mention them, China analyst Gordon G. Chang said the party connections, such as those Kelly fostered, are absolutely essential for securing Chinese business deals. The Chinese Communist Party tries to control everything, whether it's a state enterprise or a private company, he said, and so it's extremely important to have Communist Party contacts to do business. Kelly's also had extensive ties with the Chinese since becoming a civilian. Worldview Enterprise, an aerospace company he co-founded and in which he still holds investments, received funding from Chinese tech giant Tencent, which censors the internet for Beijing. As the Washington Free Beacon reported, he also held a financial stake in a Colorado company that courted investments from a Chinese state-funded tech enterprise. He now has assets worth $27 million, according to financial disclosures. And it goes on from there. And again, a lot of this is also in the book. Senate risk. What are they called? Security risk senators by Trevor Loudon. So there's a lot to research on some of these guys. I need to get Trevor on here to talk about these guys, because I'd like to know if some of them are being perhaps influenced by foreign nations to say what they're saying to create this confusion and lack of order within our military by making these statements. I'd love to hear what Trevor's got on this. I'll have to get him on, but that'll give you some stuff to research over the holiday weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, it lines up directly with what communists like to do when you end up coming to their country. They like to wine and dine you and convince you to get on board with business. And then what they don't tell you, how you mentioned, to take some pictures of people being inappropriate in inappropriate positions and stuff. Well, that's what ends up happening. So they go over there, they wine and dine them, get them into a vulnerable position, take photographs, take things, and then they end up blackmailing them in order to push their agenda. Now, if you play the game right, there's money to be made for you. So in that eye, that's a win-win situation for you. But they're holding that over your head, right? It makes perfect sense. It wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if that actually took place.
Let's show his screenshot for his ex. If you want to follow him, guys, here it is. Matt Tardio. You can follow him at AngerTab, and find out all about his broadcast, Speak the Truth. Thank you for your service to the country, which continues to this day, and for being with us, and hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
Oh, you too. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you, sir. Look forward to having you back. Matt Tardio checking in, folks. Follow him on X at AngerTab. All right, we'll be right back after this very short break.